All right, we are ready to kick off with chapter 17 of A Long Walk to Water. This is the next to last chapter. So we are going to finish tomorrow, and we know when we left off, Salva was made aware that his father is still alive, and he is off from New York back to Sudan to see his father because dad is apparently very sick and in the hospital. So let's see how their reunion turns out. Chapter 17, Southern Sudan, 2009. "What do you think we are building here?" Naya's father asked, smiling. "A house?" Naya guessed. "Or a barn?" Her father shook his head. "Something better," he said. "A school." Naya's eyes widened. The nearest school was half a day's walk from their home. Naya knew this because Deb had wanted to go there, but it was too far. "A school?" she echoed. "Yes," he replied. "With the well here, no one will have to go to the pond anymore, so all the children will be able to go to school." Naya stared at her father, her mouth open, but no words came out. When at last she was able to speak, it was only a whisper. "All the children, Papa? The girls too?" Her father's smile grew broader. "Yes, Naya, girls too," he said. "Now go and fetch water for us." And he returned to his work, scything the long grass. Naya went back and picked up the plastic can. She felt as if she were flying. School! She would learn to read and write. Sudan and Rochester, New York, 2003 through 2007. Saba stood at the foot of one of the beds in the crowded clinic. "Hello," he said. "Hello," the patient replied politely. "I have come to visit you," Saba said. "To visit me?" The man frowned. "But who are you?" "You are Maween Du Ariak, aren't you?" "Yes, that is my name." Saba smiled, his insides trembling. Even though his father looked older now, Saba had recognized him right away, but it was as if his eyes needed help from his ears. He needed to hear his father's words to believe he was real. "I am your son. I am Salva." The man looked at Salva and shook his head. "No," he said, "it is not possible." "Yes," Salva said, "it's me, father." He moved to the side of the bed. Maween Dude reached out and touched the arm of this tall stranger beside him. "Salva?" he whispered. "Can it really be you?" Salva waited. Maween Dude stared for a long moment, then cried out, "Salva, my son, my son!" His body shaking with sobs of joy, he reached up and hugged Salva tightly. It had been almost 19 years since they had last seen each other. Mawindu sprinkled water on his son's head, the Dinka way of blessing someone who was lost and found again. "Everyone was sure you were dead," Maween Duke said. "The village wanted to kill a cow for you." That was how Salva's village people mourned the death of a loved one. "I would not let them," his father said. "I never gave up hope. And you were still alive somewhere." And my mother?" Salva asked, barely daring to hope. His father smiled. "She is back in the village." Salva wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "I must see her." But his father shook his head. "There is still war in Lurin Ariak, my son. If you went there, both sides would try to force you to fight with them. You must not go." There was so much more to talk about. His father told Salva that his sisters were with his mother, but of his three brothers, only Ring had survived the war. Arik, the oldest, and Kual, the youngest, were both dead. Little Kual, Salva closed his eyes for a moment, trying to picture his brothers through a haze of time and grief. He learned more about his father's illness. Years of drinking contaminated water had left Maween Duke's entire digestive system riddled with guinea worms. Sick and weak, he had walked almost 300 miles to come to this clinic, and he was barely alive by the time he finally arrived. Salva and his father had several days together, but all too soon it was time for Salva to return to America. His father would be leaving the clinic shortly as well. The surgery he had undergone had been successful, and he would soon be strong enough to make the long walk home. "I will come to the village," Salva promised, "as soon as it is safe." "We will be there waiting for you," his father promised in turn. Salva pressed his face tightly to his father's as they hugged goodbye, their tears flowing and blending together. On the plane back to the United States, Salva replayed in his mind every moment of his visit with his father. He felt again the coolness of his brow when his father had sprinkled the water blessing on him. And an idea had come to him, an idea of what he might be able to do to help the people of Sudan. Could he do it? It would take so much work. Perhaps it would be too difficult. But how would he know unless he tried? Back in Rochester, Salva began working on his idea. There were, it seemed, a million problems to be solved. He needed a lot of help. Chris and Louise gave him many suggestions. Scott, a friend of theirs, was an expert in setting up projects like the one Salva had in mind. He and Salva worked together for hours and days, which grew into weeks and months. Along the way, Salva met other people who wanted to help. He was grateful to all of them, but even with their help, it was much more work than he had imagined. Salva had to raise money for the project, and there was only one way to do this. He would have to talk to people and ask to give money. The first time Salva spoke in front of an audience in the school cafeteria was in a school cafeteria. About 100 people had come to hear him. There was a microphone at the front of the room. Salva's knees were shaking as he walked to the mic. He knew that his English was still not very good. What if he made mistakes in pronunciation? What if the audience couldn't understand him? But he had to do it. If he didn't talk about the project, no one would learn about it. No one would donate money, and he would never be able to make it work. Salva spoke into the microphone. Hello, he said. At that moment, something went wrong with the sound system. The speakers behind him let out a dreadful screech. Salva jumped and almost dropped the mic. His hands trembling, he looked out at the audience. People were smiling or chuckling. A few of the children were holding their ears. They all looked very friendly, and seeing the children made him remember. It was not the first time he had spoken in front of a large group of people. Years before, when he was leading those boys on their walk from the Ethiopian refugee camp to the one in Kenya, he had called a meeting every morning and evening. The boys would line up facing him and he would talk to them about their plans. All those eyes at him, but every face interested in what he had to say. It was the same here. The audience had come to the school cafeteria because they wanted to hear him. Thinking of that made him feel a little better, and he spoke into the mic again. Hello, he repeated, and this time only his own voice came from the speakers. He smiled in relief and went on. I am here to talk to you about a project for Southern Sudan. A year passed, then two, then three. Salva spoke to hundreds of people in churches, at civic organizations, in schools. Would he ever be able to turn his idea into reality? Whenever he found himself losing hope, Salva would take a deep breath and think of his uncle's words. One step at a time, one problem at a time. Just figure out this one problem. Day by day, solving one problem at a time, Salva moved toward his goal. So, what we saw in that chapter was the beginning stages of his idea for water for South Sudan. And if you remember those videos we watched before we started the book, they go to Sudan and actually drill wells. They make wells so that the people have clean water. So, think about it. If Naya's village is getting this new well, they're finally getting clean water. Think about the boss that was described in earlier chapters. He was persistent, he never gave up, he was encouraging to his staff. Could that potentially be Salva? Come back tomorrow and we'll find out. All right, so we are still reviewing syllable division. If you remember yesterday, I talked about the first four rules. We had the rule where we split a word between two of the same consonants that are in between vowels. Our other rule was splitting between two different consonants in between two vowels. We also talked about splitting a word with a digraph into syllables. And what was the other one? Oh, splitting a multisyllabic word that only has one consonant in between two syllables or two vowels. So let me just review very quickly. We'll look at cabin, locket. Yeah, we'll just look at cabin and locket. So, boys and girls, starting with cabin, just to briefly review, we have two vowels. We know that our first step in breaking of multisyllabic words into the different syllables or into the different pushes of breath is to identify the vowels. So A and I are my vowels. I have a B in between those. I know from yesterday that the syllable division rule states that when I have one consonant in between two vowels, I keep this consonant with the first syllable to keep it closed. So we stayed at a cabin in the woods. We didn't stay at a cabin, we stayed at a cabin. Now, locket, we found our vowels. We have an O and an E, and then in between that O and E is a CK digraph. Remember, digraphs are those letters that stick so closely together they can't be broken up. They also make a single sound. And we know that when we have a digraph, we keep it with the first syllable to keep the first syllable closed. So, lock it. Lock it. Okay, today I'm only going to review one more syllable division rule, and that is the one for compound words. I'm also going to review the spelling for the CK sound, the k at the end of multisyllabic words or words that have one syllable. So compound words, when we want to divide those into syllables, it's pretty simple. We simply split the word up because we know that compound words are two words that are put together, and when we break them apart or when we divide the syllables, the words can stand alone. So, upset. She was very upset that they don't get to go back to school this year. We have up and set as our syllables. When in between our U and our E, the two vowels. But we can also look at this as this word being up and this word being set. So, up, set. We just break it up like that. Another one we could do himself. Himself. He told himself that he would get up extra early for school. If we do it the old school way, we start off with identifying our vowels first. We have our I and our E. We have an M and an S blend in between them. But this is also a compound word, so we could just break it up like this. Himself. Himself. I'll do one more compound word. Let's see. Let's do bathtub. Bathtub. She had to rush in the bathtub because she was running late. A and U are my vowels. What's in between my vowels? I have a TH digraph, the, bath, and then I also have a T consonant. So all of this is in between here, but I can still break it up like this because I have a word bath and then tub. And tomorrow I'll talk more about breaking up words that have a digraph and another consonant. But in this case, bath and tub, bathtub is a compound word because bath and tub can stand alone. So it follows the compound rule, the compound word syllable division rule. Okay, and then for the last thing, I do want to review the k or that CK spelling at the end of multisyllabic words or words that have more than one syllable. When you have a word like public, it is not really safe to go out in public right now. You might think that it's spelled like this. Public, as in actually like the word lick with that CK ending for that sound. However, anytime we have more than one syllable, more than one push in a word, push of breath in a word, we simply just spell it IC. It has an IC ending, not the CK ending. So public would look like this. And then we would just follow the same syllable division rules. We have a U and an I. We have a BL blend in between. So we simply split it in between those two different consonants, public. Same thing with like words like clinic, which is the place Salva's dad was, and Sonic, like the restaurant. They all in that the neck sound, but they all have an IC ending because there's more than one syllable. So we have two I's, one consonant in. We know that this one consonant needs to go with the first syllable to keep it close. Clinic. And then the same thing with sonic. We have sun and ick. The O and the I and then the N in between the two vowels. So we split it up like that. So we added another syllable division rule today for compound words. And then we also reviewed that sound at the end of multisyllabic words. So come back tomorrow. We're going to keep on reviewing, keep on adding on.